The phone rang at 2:30 on a Thursday afternoon, just as I was finishing my second cup of Earl Grey on the terrace overlooking Long Island Sound. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer anyway. Maybe it was the same instinct that had been whispering warnings to me for the past 18 months, the one I'd been desperately trying to ignore. "Mrs. Breckett?" The voice on the other end was male, hesitant, almost trembling. "This is Thomas Brennan. I was the photographer at your son's wedding 2 weeks ago." My stomach dropped. When a vendor calls you 2 weeks after a wedding, it's never good news. Lost deposits, damaged equipment, something wrong with the final product. But there was something in his tone that went beyond professional concern. "Yes, Mr. Brennan. Is there a problem with the photographs?" There was a long pause, too long. I could hear him breathing on the other end, could almost feel him wrestling with whatever he was about to say. "Mrs. Breckett, I need you to come to my studio in Stamford as soon as possible. I discovered something while I was finalizing the wedding album. Something terrible." Another pause. "Please don't say anything to your son yet. You need to see this first." The world tilted slightly. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles going white around the case. "What kind of something?" "I can't explain over the phone. I've been debating for 2 weeks whether I should even show you this, but as someone who was betrayed in my own marriage, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. How soon can you get here?" 45 minutes later, I was pulling into the parking lot of a small photography studio in downtown Stamford, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. The drive from Greenwich had been a blur of Connecticut highways and spiraling thoughts. What could possibly be in those wedding photos that warranted this kind of urgency, this kind of secrecy? But even as I asked myself that question, I already knew. Deep down, in that place where women's intuition lives, where we bury the truths we don't want to face, I knew. Thomas Brennan was waiting for me at the door. He was probably in his early 40s, with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes that looked like they'd seen too much pain. He ushered me inside without small talk, and I was grateful for that. I didn't think I could bear another second of not knowing. His studio was small but professional, walls lined with framed wedding photos and family portraits. Under different circumstances, I might have admired his work. Instead, I barely saw any of it as he led me to a back office where a large computer monitor dominated a cluttered desk. "Mrs. Breckett, before I show you this, I want you to know that I've photographed over 300 weddings in the past 15 years. I've seen a lot of things through my lens, but I've never seen anything quite like this." He sat down at the computer, his hand hovering over the mouse. "Are you sure you want to see?" "Show me." He clicked, and the screen filled with an image that made the room spin. It was Margot, my son's bride, in her $12,000 wedding gown. She was in the garden area of the Ashwood estate, partially hidden behind the white rose trellis we'd specifically chosen for photo opportunities. But she wasn't posing for a photo. She was locked in an intimate conversation with Devon Hartley, my son's best man, Ethan's best friend since college, the man who had stood beside my son at the altar just 2 weeks ago and promised to support their marriage. "This is just the first one," Thomas said quietly. He clicked to the next image. In this one, Devon's hand was on Margot's arm. They were leaning into each other, their faces inches apart. The body language was unmistakable. Click. The next photo showed them in a full embrace, Margot's arms around Devon's neck, their bodies pressed together in a way that left no room for innocent interpretation. Click. The final image stopped my heart. It was a kiss, brief but deliberate, and the look on Margot's face was what destroyed me. It wasn't surprise, it wasn't resistance. It was familiarity, comfort, like she'd done this 1,000 times before. "What time were these taken?" My voice didn't sound like my own. Thomas highlighted the metadata at the bottom of the screen. 9:47 and 32 seconds p.m. He pulled up another window on the screen, this one showing video footage. "This is from the videographer's feed, time-stamped identically." He pressed play. There was my son Ethan on the stage in the main reception hall, microphone in hand, his face glowing with happiness. "Margot is the light that illuminated my life after the darkness," he was saying, his voice thick with emotion. "After my father died, I thought I'd never feel whole again, but she showed me that love can heal even the deepest wounds." The timestamp in the corner read 9:47 p.m. The exact same moment his new wife was kissing his best friend in the garden. I couldn't breathe. The room was too hot, too small, too real. I gripped the edge of Thomas's desk, trying to anchor myself to something solid, while everything I thought I knew about my son's marriage crumbled into dust. "There's more," Thomas said, and I wanted to tell him to stop, that I'd seen enough, that I couldn't take any more. But I didn't, because if there was more, I needed to know. I needed to see the full scope of what had been done to my son. He opened a folder containing dozens of images, clicking through them methodically. Margot and Devon exchanging glances during the ceremony. A brief touch of hands under the dinner table. Margot whispering something in Devon's ear while I was dancing with Ethan during our mother-son dance. In every single photo, there was an intimacy that went far beyond friendship. "I didn't notice it in the moment," Thomas explained, his voice gentle but firm. "When you're shooting a wedding, you're focused on capturing moments, not analyzing them. But when I sat down to curate the album, going through all 2,847 photos, the patterns became impossible to ignore. This isn't a one-time thing, Mrs. Breckett. This is a pre-existing relationship." I stared at the screen, my mind racing backward through the past 18 months. Every interaction I'd had with Margot played on repeat, but now, with a new lens. The way she'd appeared in Ethan's life so suddenly, so perfectly. How she'd said all the right things, worn all the right clothes, played the part of the ideal daughter-in-law with precision that had seemed too polished, too rehearsed. I'd told myself I was being paranoid, that I was projecting my own trauma onto an innocent woman. After all, I'd been the one who discovered my husband Richard's secrets after he died 4 years ago. The hidden bank accounts, the emails with another woman, the whole second life I'd never suspected. Of course, I'd be hyper-vigilant about relationships that seemed too perfect. Of course, I'd look for cracks in every facade. But this wasn't paranoia. This was real. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked Thomas, though I already knew the answer. "Because 3 years ago, my wife had an affair with my business partner. I found out by accident, through photos someone else had taken at a company retreat. If someone had known and not told me, letting me continue living a lie, I would never have forgiven them." He looked at me with those sad, experienced eyes. I debated for 2 weeks. I almost convinced myself it wasn't my place, that maybe I was misinterpreting what I saw. But then I kept coming back to these photos, to the timestamp, to the fact that she was kissing another man at the exact moment your son was declaring his love for her in front of 180 people. 180 people. 3 months of planning. $175,000 spent on what I thought was my son's happiness. And all of it was a lie. "I need copies of everything," I heard myself say. "Every photo that shows them together. Every timestamp. Everything." Thomas nodded and pulled out an encrypted flash drive from his desk drawer. "I already prepared this for you. Every relevant image is here along with the metadata. I also included my contact information in case you need me to testify to anything. I don't know what you're going to do with this information, but whatever it is, I'll support you." I took the flash drive with numb fingers, staring at the small piece of black plastic that contained the evidence of my son's betrayal. Not just by his wife, but by his best friend, the 2 people he trusted most in the world, aside from me. "Does anyone else know about this?" I asked. "No one. Not even my assistant. I've been the only person to review these photos. Thank you." The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. "Thank you for telling me, for giving me the chance to figure out how to handle this before my son sees these images." Because that was the real gift Thomas had given me. Not just the evidence, but time. Time to understand what had really happened. Time to protect my son from discovering this in the worst possible way. Time to plan. I left the studio in a daze, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. Or maybe like a grenade. I wasn't sure which yet. The afternoon sun was too bright, the world too normal. People were going about their lives, buying coffee, walking dogs, completely unaware that my entire world had just imploded. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Time had lost meaning. All I could think about was Ethan's face on our wedding day, so full of joy and hope. The way he'd looked at Margot during their first dance, like she was the answer to every question he'd ever had. The way he'd pulled me aside during the reception and whispered, "Thank you for accepting her, Mom. I know you had reservations, but she's the one. I've never been more sure of anything." I'd smiled and hugged him and told him I was happy for him, even though something in my gut had been screaming that something was wrong. But I'd ignored it. I'd told myself I was being overprotective, paranoid, unable to accept that my son was growing up and starting his own family. I'd forced myself to embrace Margot, to welcome her, to ignore every instinct that told me she was performing rather than being genuine. And now I knew why my instincts had been screaming. They'd been trying to protect my son from exactly this. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Ethan. "Dinner tonight? Margot's making her famous lasagna, and we'd love to have you over. 7 o'clock? I stared at the message, at the casual happiness in those words, and felt something inside me harden. My son had no idea that his marriage was built on lies, that the woman making him lasagna had been kissing his best friend at their wedding, that his entire life had been infiltrated by people who were using him. But I knew, and I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. I couldn't just hand him these photos. It would destroy him. Ethan had been fragile since Richard's death, desperate for connection and stability. Finding the right partner had become almost an obsession for him, a way to prove to himself that he could build something permanent and real after losing his father so suddenly. If I just showed him these images without context, without understanding the full scope of what had happened, it might break him completely. No, I needed more information first. I needed to understand exactly who Margot Sinclair really was, who Devon Hartley had become, how long this had been going on, whether it was just an affair or something more calculated. I needed the truth, all of it, before I could figure out how to help my son survive it. I typed a response to Ethan. "Would love to, honey. See you at 7. Then I made another call to a number I'd saved 4 years ago but never used. A private investigator named Marcus Webb, former NYPD detective who'd helped me uncover Richard's secrets after his death. The secrets I'd never told Ethan about because I wanted to preserve his memory of his father. Maybe that had been my first mistake. Maybe if I'd been honest with my son about the ways people can hide who they really are, he would have been more careful, more skeptical, less trusting of perfect facades. But I couldn't change the past. I could only try to minimize the damage in the present. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Breckett, it's been a while. I need your help again," I said. "And I need it fast." I met Marcus Webb the next morning at a quiet coffee shop in Westport, far enough from Greenwich that we wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I'd spent the previous evening at Ethan and Margot's apartment, smiling through dinner while my stomach churned, watching my son gaze adoringly at his wife while she served lasagna and played the role of devoted newlywed with Oscar-worthy precision. Marcus looked exactly as I remembered him. Mid-50s, steel-gray hair cut military short, eyes that missed nothing. He'd been the one to help me unravel Richard's secret life after the funeral, patient and thorough as I discovered that my 28-year marriage had been built on carefully maintained lies. "Tell me everything," he said, skipping the pleasantries. I appreciated that about him. I slid the flash drive across the table. My son got married 2 weeks ago. The photographer found these while preparing the wedding album. Marcus pulled out his laptop and spent 10 silent minutes reviewing the images. His expression never changed, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly when he reached the kissing photo. "How much do you know about the bride?" he asked. Apparently nothing. The bitterness in my voice surprised me. "Margot Sinclair, 26 years old. She told us she works as a freelance branding consultant, whatever that means. Says she grew up in Ohio, that her parents helped pay for her education. She and Ethan met 18 months ago at an art gallery opening in Manhattan. And the best man? Devon Hartley, 29. He and Ethan were roommates at Cornell, studied architecture together. Devon switched to real estate after graduation, works as a luxury property broker in Manhattan. He's been Ethan's closest friend for almost 10 years. I paused, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. Until 2 weeks ago, I would have trusted him with my son's life. Marcus nodded slowly, making notes on his phone. "What's your son's financial situation?" The question felt invasive, but I knew why he was asking. Ethan inherited $3 million when Richard died, Plus, he'll receive the remainder of Richard's estate when he turns 30. That's another $5.5 million, managed through a trust I control. He also has his own income as an architect, around $180,000 a year. Plus the apartment I gave them as a wedding gift, worth about $620,000. So roughly $9 million, accessible within the next 2 years. Yes? And what does the bride bring to the marriage financially? I realized I didn't actually know. She said her family helped with her education, so I assumed she didn't have student loans. Beyond that, I never asked. It seemed rude. Mrs. Breckett, in my experience, when something seems too perfect, it usually is. When did your son meet this woman? March of last year. He came home one night absolutely radiating happiness, said he'd met the woman of his life at a gallery opening. They'd talked for hours about art and architecture. She was beautiful, intelligent, shared all his interests. It felt like fate, he said. And how long before they got engaged? 8 months. They were engaged by November, married this month. I tried to suggest they wait, get to know each other better, but Ethan was adamant. He said, when you know, you know. I felt tears prickling behind my eyes, but refused to let them fall. After Richard died, Ethan became obsessed with building his own family. He said he needed something permanent, something that couldn't be taken away suddenly. I thought it was grief. I thought he'd slow down once the initial intensity wore off. But he didn't. No. If anything, he accelerated, started talking about buying a house, having children right away. Margot went along with everything, always smiling, always agreeable. My best friend Chloe, she's a psychologist, she told me something felt rehearsed about Margot, that she never seemed to have genuine reactions, just appropriate ones. Marcus was typing rapidly now. What about the best man? How involved was he in the relationship? Very. Ethan asked Devon to help Margot find office space for her consulting business last summer. Said he trusted Devon's knowledge of Manhattan real estate. After that, the three of them spent a lot of time together. Dinners, weekends in the Hamptons, couples activities with Devon and whatever woman he was casually dating at the time. I paused, remembering. Actually, Devon never seemed to have a serious girlfriend. It was always someone new, someone temporary. Did Margot and Devon spend time alone together? I don't know. I wasn't monitoring them. Devon was Ethan's best friend. It never occurred to me to question their interactions. Marcus closed his laptop and looked at me directly. Mrs. Breckett, I'm going to be blunt. This has all the hallmarks of a setup, the whirlwind romance, the quick engagement, the best friend who's conveniently single and involved in facilitating their relationship. I've seen this pattern before. Usually, it's about money. I'd known he was going to say something like that, but hearing it out loud still felt like a physical blow. You think she targeted him deliberately? I think it's a possibility we need to investigate. Give me 1 week. I'll find out everything there is to know about Margot Sinclair and Devon Hartley. Their histories, their finances, whether they knew each other before your son met her. Everything. We shook hands, and I gave him a retainer check for $10,000. It felt surreal, hiring someone to investigate my son's wife. But what choice did I have? I couldn't just confront them with the photos and hope for the truth. People who were capable of this level of deception wouldn't suddenly become honest when caught. The next week was torture. I had to maintain normalcy, attending a dinner at Ethan and Margot's apartment, meeting Margot for coffee when she suggested getting to know each other better as family. Every interaction felt like a performance on both sides. She played the devoted daughter-in-law, and I played the accepting mother. While underneath, we were both hiding completely different truths. During that coffee meeting, I studied her more carefully than I ever had before. Margot was undeniably beautiful, with long dark hair and striking blue eyes. She wore expensive clothes, but they were always slightly too trendy, like she was trying to fit into a world she didn't quite understand. And she had this habit of touching the necklace she always wore, a delicate gold piece she'd told us was a family heirloom. Every time I asked about her family, about her childhood, about her past, the answers were brief and shifted the conversation back to Ethan, to their future together, to safe topics. "I'm so grateful you accepted me," she said at one point, her hand wrapped around her latte. "I know you had reservations about how quickly everything moved, but I love Ethan so much, Vivienne. He's everything I've ever wanted in a partner." The lie came so smoothly from her lips that if I hadn't seen those photos, I might have believed her. I smiled and told her I was happy for them, even as I wanted to throw my coffee in her face and demand to know who she really was and what she wanted from my son. Marcus called me exactly 1 week later. "I have the report. You're going to want to sit down for this." We met at the same coffee shop. He handed me a manila folder, thick with printed pages and photographs. 47 pages total. "Margot Sinclair grew up in Toledo, Ohio," Marcus began. "Father Gary Sinclair, former factory manager. Mother Donna Sinclair, part-time administrative assistant. Middle-class family until 2015, when Gary lost his job during a round of layoffs. The family lost their home to foreclosure 6 months later." I opened the folder and saw copies of bankruptcy filings, foreclosure notices, documents that painted a picture of financial devastation. "Margot was 19 when it happened," Marcus continued. "She was attending Ohio State University on student loans. After the foreclosure, she transferred to a cheaper school, took on additional loans to support herself. Current student loan debt is $87,000. She told Ethan her family helped pay for her education. She lied. She graduated with a degree in communications and moved to New York City 4 years ago. Worked as a hostess at high-end events, charity galas, corporate functions, gallery openings, places where wealthy people congregate." He pulled out several photos. "This is where it gets interesting." The photos showed Margot at various events, always in expensive dresses, always smiling, always in conversation with well-dressed men and women. In one photo, she was standing very close to a silver-haired man who had to be in his 60s. In another, she was laughing with a group that included several people I recognized from Greenwich social circles. "She was good at her job," Marcus said. "Very good. She learned how to blend into wealthy environments, how to talk to rich people, how to make them feel comfortable. And about 2 years ago, she met someone." He pulled out another set of photos, and my heart stopped. They showed Margot and Devon together. Multiple locations, multiple dates, a restaurant in Tribeca, a wine bar in the West Village, walking together on a street I didn't recognize. The timestamps ranged from March 2 years ago to August of the same year, months before Margot supposedly met Ethan for the first time. "They knew each other," I whispered. "They knew each other well." I pulled surveillance footage from Margot's apartment building in the Bronx. Devon visited her apartment 6 times between June and August that year. He stayed for 4 to 6 hours each time. The implications crashed over me like a wave. This wasn't an affair that started after the wedding. This wasn't even an affair that started during the engagement. Devon and Margot had been involved before she ever met my son. "Keep reading," Marcus said quietly. I turned the pages with shaking hands. Bank records showing Margot's financial struggles, credit card debt that had ballooned to $30,000. Then, suddenly, payments. Large payments that coincided with her relationship with Ethan beginning, her debt dropping from $30,000 to $15,000 over the course of 6 months. Cash deposits with no clear source. "Where did the money come from?" I asked. "I can't prove it yet, but the timing suggests Devon. He had a very good year in real estate around the same time. Sold a penthouse in Tribeca for $18 million, earned a commission of over $300,000. I felt sick. He paid her to date my son. That's my working theory. Or at least he financially supported her while she pursued your son. But there's one more thing." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a series of text messages, somehow retrieved from phone records I didn't want to know how he'd accessed. They were between Devon and Margot, dated from the previous year. Devon: "Did you meet him yet?" Margot: "Tonight. Gallery opening like you suggested." Devon: "Remember, he likes modern art and classical architecture. Mention Frank Lloyd Wright." Margot: "I know. We've been over this 100 times." Devon: "Just be yourself. Well, the version of yourself he'll fall for." Margot: "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who has to pretend to be in love for the next 2 years." Devon: 2 years and we split $9 million. You can pretend for that. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was reading. They had planned this. Every moment of Ethan's relationship with Margot had been orchestrated. The chance meeting at the gallery, the shared interests, the whirlwind romance. All of it was a con designed to get access to my son's inheritance. "There's more," Marcus said. But I think that's enough for now. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I looked at him. This man who'd helped me uncover my husband's betrayal and was now helping me protect my son from an even worse one. I want to know everything, I said, my voice steady despite the rage and heartbreak coursing through me. Every detail, every lie, every moment of this planned deception. And then I'm going to make sure they never get a single penny of my son's money and that he knows exactly who he married. But even as I said it, I knew it wouldn't be that simple, because there was still one question I didn't have an answer to. How do you tell your son that his entire marriage, his entire love story, was nothing but a calculated con? I spent 3 days absorbing every detail in Marcus's report, reading it over and over until I had every date, every transaction, every incriminating text message memorized. But information alone wasn't enough. I needed a strategy. I needed to understand not just what they'd done, but how to dismantle it without destroying Ethan in the process. The problem was that my son was happy. Devastatingly, blindly happy. Every time I saw him, he was glowing with the kind of contentment I hadn't seen since before Richard died. He talked about starting a family with Margot, about buying a house in Westport with a yard for children and a dog. He'd even started looking at properties, excited about putting down roots, building something permanent. How do you take that away from someone? How do you tell them that the foundation they're building on is made of lies? Chloe came over on the 4th day after my meeting with Marcus. I'd called her in desperation, needing someone to help me think clearly. She arrived with wine, and the kind of no-nonsense compassion that had made her one of the best therapists in Connecticut. "Show me everything," she said, settling into my living room with her reading glasses. I handed her the folder. She read in silence for nearly an hour while I paced, unable to sit still, unable to stop the scenarios running through my mind. Each one ended with Ethan's face crumbling, his trust in people shattered, his belief in love destroyed. Finally, Chloe looked up. "This is calculated predation. They identified a vulnerable target and executed a long-term con. The question isn't whether you tell him, it's how and when. I keep thinking I should just show him the photos and the evidence. Let him see the truth all at once. That would destroy him," Chloe said bluntly. "Ethan hasn't processed Richard's death properly. He's substituted grief work with romantic idealization. If you shatter that illusion without context, without support, you risk a complete psychological break. So what do I do? Let him stay married to a con artist? No. But you need to build a case so airtight that when you do present it, there's no room for him to rationalize it away or blame himself. And you need to be prepared for the possibility that even with overwhelming evidence, he might not want to believe you." That thought terrified me more than anything else, that I could have proof of Margot's deception, and Ethan would choose to believe her instead of me. "There's something else you need to consider," Chloe continued. "These people are dangerous. Not physically, perhaps, but they've already demonstrated sophisticated manipulation skills. If you confront them before you're ready, they'll adapt. They'll create counter-narratives. Margot will cry, Devon will apologize, and they'll spin a story that makes Ethan choose between believing his mother or believing his wife and best friend. So I need more than the photos and the financial records. You need a confession, or you need to catch them in the act, in a way that's undeniable." I thought about this for a long moment. Marcus said Devon visited Margot's old apartment 6 times. What if they're still meeting? Then you follow them. You document everything, and you wait for them to make a mistake. It felt like something out of a bad detective novel, but Chloe was right. I needed undeniable proof, the kind that couldn't be explained away or rationalized. I called Marcus that evening. "I need surveillance on both of them. I need to know if they're still seeing each other." "Already on it," he said. "I've had someone watching Devon's apartment and Margot's movements for the past 3 days. And? Margot has been to Devon's apartment in the Upper West Side twice since the wedding. Once 3 days ago, stayed for 2 hours. Once yesterday, stayed for 90 minutes. Both times when your son was at work. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting it. What were they doing? I don't have audio, but I have photos of them entering and leaving. In yesterday's shots, Margot looks upset. Devon has his arm around her when they leave the building. Send me everything." The photos arrived in my email, 20 minutes later, there was Margot, in casual clothes that were nothing like the elegant outfits she wore around Ethan and me, entering Devon's building. Her body language was familiar, comfortable. This wasn't someone visiting a friend. This was someone coming home. The exit photos showed them standing on the sidewalk, Devon's arm around her shoulders, her face pressed against his chest. Even in the grainy surveillance image, the intimacy was obvious. I had proof they were still seeing each other. But I needed more. I needed to know what they were planning, what they were saying to each other. I needed to understand the full scope of their con. "Can you get audio?" I asked Marcus when I called him back. There was a long pause. "That's legally complicated, Mrs. Breckett. I can follow them, photograph them in public spaces, but recording private conversations without consent crosses into wiretapping territory. What if we create a situation where they incriminate themselves willingly?" "What kind of situation?" An idea was forming, risky but potentially effective. What if they thought they were about to get caught? What if they believed someone else knew about their plan? You want to spook them, see how they react. Exactly. If they think their con is about to be exposed, they'll either run or they'll try to secure their position. Either way, they'll have to communicate, and that communication might give us what we need. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "It's risky. If they suspect you specifically, they could turn Ethan against you preemptively. Make you look like the paranoid, jealous mother who can't let go." He was right. I'd already worried about that scenario. But doing nothing while my son stayed trapped in a fraudulent marriage wasn't an option either. "Let me think about how to approach it," I said. But fate, or perhaps karma, intervened before I had to make that decision. 2 days later, I was having lunch at a restaurant in Greenwich when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, still raw from Thomas Brennan's call 2 weeks earlier, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Breckett?" The voice was female, young, nervous. "You don't know me, but I need to tell you something about your daughter-in-law." My heart started racing. "Who is this?" "I can't tell you my name, but I worked with Margot at event hosting in Manhattan. We were friends, or I thought we were, until I figured out what she was doing." Who was doing?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Margot. She used to talk about her plan all the time, how she was going to find a rich guy and marry him for his money. She said she'd been practicing for years, learning how wealthy people talked and acted, studying what they valued. She said it was like becoming an actress, but with a bigger payoff." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because last week I saw her Instagram. All these photos of her perfect wedding, her perfect husband, playing the happy newlywed. And I realized she actually did it. She found her rich target and married him. And then I found out who her husband was, and I looked you up, and I couldn't stay quiet. That's your son she's conning." My hands were shaking. "Did she ever mention someone named Devon?" There was a pause. "The real estate guy?" "Yeah, he was her boyfriend. Or partner, I guess. They worked together on the whole thing. He was supposed to find the target, someone rich and vulnerable, and she was supposed to reel him in. They were going to split whatever they got." "How do you know all this?" "Margot told me. She bragged about it. She thought it was clever, thought I'd be impressed. This was about 1.5 years ago, before she met your son. She said Devon had found the perfect mark, some architect whose dad had just died and left him millions. She showed me his Instagram, talked about how he was exactly what they'd been looking for." I felt nauseous. "Did she say anything else?" "Just that it would take a couple years to get access to all the money, something about a trust, but that they were patient, and that once they got it, they'd divorce and disappear. She made it sound so easy, like your son was just a bank account with feelings she had to manage. The casual cruelty of it staggered me. "Why didn't you report this to someone?" "Report what? That my friend said she was going to marry a rich guy? It's not illegal to marry someone for money. And I didn't have proof. I just knew what she'd told me. But now, seeing her actually doing it, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least try to warn you. Will you testify to this? Will you talk to my lawyer?" I don't know. I don't want to get involved. I just wanted you to know the truth. I have to go." The line went dead. I sat in the restaurant, my lunch forgotten, trying to process what I'd just heard. An anonymous tipster wasn't great evidence in court, but it corroborated everything Marcus had found. More importantly, it confirmed the emotional dimension of their con. This wasn't just about money. It was about the callous manipulation of a grieving man's vulnerability. I paid my bill and drove straight to Marcus's office. He listened to my account of the phone call, taking notes. "Did you recognize the voice?" he asked. "No." She sounded young, maybe mid-20s. Nervous but not uncertain, if that makes sense. "I'll see if I can trace the number, though if she used a burner phone or a voice app, it'll be difficult." He leaned back in his chair. "But this confirms the timeline. They've been planning this for at least 2 years. What do I do with this information? For now, nothing. It's hearsay from an anonymous source, but it gives us direction. If we can find this woman, get her to testify officially, it becomes much more powerful." I nodded, but my mind was already spinning ahead. I couldn't wait for perfect evidence anymore. Every day Ethan stayed married to Margot was another day they had access to his life, his money, his trust. Every day was another day they were winning. "I'm going to confront them," I said. "Mrs. Breckett, I strongly advise against that until we have everything documented. I'm not confronting both of them. Just Devon. Alone. If I can get him to admit what they've done, even partially, it might be enough to convince Ethan. And if he denies everything, then at least he'll know I'm onto them. Maybe that'll make them sloppy." Marcus sighed. "If you're determined to do this, at least let me wire you. We can't use it in court, but you'll have a record of what he says." 2 hours later, I was wearing a wire that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds against my skin, sitting in a Starbucks in Stamford, waiting for Devon Hartley. I'd texted him that morning, asking to meet privately. "I need to talk to you about something important regarding Ethan. Can you spare an hour today?" He'd agreed immediately, probably thinking I wanted to discuss a birthday gift or some family matter. He arrived exactly on time, wearing a tailored suit and that easy smile that had always made him seem so trustworthy. Looking at him now, knowing what I knew, I could see the calculation behind the charm. "Vivienne," he said warmly, giving me a brief hug. "Is everything okay? Your text sounded serious. Sit down, Devon." Something in my tone made his smile falter. He sat across from me, his posture shifting from casual to guarded. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery. Without saying a word, I turned the screen toward him, showing him the wedding photos. Margot and him in the garden. The progression from conversation to kiss. The blood drained from his face. "I've known for 2 weeks," I said quietly. "The photographer found these while preparing the album. So, before you try to lie to me, before you try to tell me it was a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness, you should know that I've had investigators looking into you and Margot for the past 10 days. Devon stared at the photos, his hands clenched on the table. "Vivienne, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. You strike me as someone who's very good at explaining things. But here's what I already know." I pulled out my tablet and opened the document I'd prepared. "I know you and Margot met 2 years ago, months before she supposedly met Ethan. I know you visited her apartment at least 6 times in the summer before she met my son. I know you've continued visiting her apartment twice since the wedding, while Ethan is at work." His jaw tightened. "You've been having me followed? You're damn right I have. You're conning my son, and I want to know exactly how deep this goes. It wasn't supposed to be like this." Devon's voice was strained. "It started as God, Vivienne. I fell in love with her, okay? I met Margot at a real estate event, and she was unlike anyone I'd ever met. But she was practical. Too practical. She told me straight out that she couldn't afford to date someone with an unstable income, that she needed security. So you offered her my son instead." "No, I mean, not at first. But Margot, she's had a hard life. Her family lost everything. She's terrified of being poor again. And I knew Ethan was looking for someone, that he was vulnerable after Richard died. I thought, maybe if they met, if they got to know each other, it could work for everyone." "Work for everyone," I repeated, my voice dripping with contempt. "You mean work as a way to get access to Ethan's inheritance?" Devon's silence was answer enough. "I have the text messages," I continued. "The ones where you coached her on what to say to him, how to act. The ones where you discussed splitting $9 million after 2 years. He closed his eyes. "Those messages, they were from early on. Before what? Before your con became a marriage? Before you stood beside my son at his wedding and watched him promise his life to a woman you'd sent to manipulate him? It wasn't like that. Margot, she actually cares about Ethan. She didn't expect to, but she does. And God, I've been torn apart watching them together. I love her, Vivienne. I know that doesn't excuse anything, but I do. So the kiss at the wedding, the apartment visits, those were what? Love? Margot was panicking. She was realizing what she'd done, how deep she'd gotten. She needed someone to talk to, and I was the only one who knew the truth. How convenient for both of you. Devon leaned forward, his voice urgent. What do you want from me? You want me to confess to Ethan? You want me to disappear? Just tell me what will make this right. Nothing will make this right, I said. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything. Every detail of how you planned this, how you executed it, what you were planning to do next. And then you're going to help me figure out how to minimize the damage to my son. And if I don't, then I take everything I have to Ethan right now, along with these recordings, and I let him decide how to destroy you both. Devon's hands were shaking. There's something else you need to know. Something that changes everything. What? Margot's pregnant. The world tilted. What? She found out last week. She's 7 weeks along. Is it Ethan's? Devon's face crumpled. We don't know. It could be his, or it could be mine. We were together the week before the wedding. One last time, she said. She was scared, and I was weak. I couldn't speak, couldn't process this new layer of betrayal. Not only had they conned my son into marriage, but now there was a child involved, a child whose paternity was uncertain. Does Ethan know she's pregnant? Not yet. Margot's been trying to figure out what to do. She's terrified. She should be terrified. She's about to face consequences for the first time in this entire elaborate con. Vivienne, please, if there's any chance that baby is Ethan's, then we'll do a paternity test. But until we know for certain, Margot doesn't get to play the expecting mother and trap my son even deeper into this nightmare. I stood up, gathering my things. You have 48 hours to convince Margot to tell Ethan the truth. All of it. The planning, the con, the uncertainty about the baby's father. If she doesn't, I will. And trust me when I say my version will be far less sympathetic than whatever story she might tell. And what about me? You stay away from my son. You stay away from Margot. You disappear from their lives completely. That's the only mercy you're going to get from me. I left him sitting there, his perfect facade finally cracked, and drove home with the wire still recording every ragged breath I took. Marcus called me 20 minutes later. I got everything. It's not admissible in court, but it's enough to show Ethan if needed. Devon said Margot's pregnant. I know, I heard. That complicates things significantly. It doesn't complicate anything, I said, my voice hard. It just means we have even less time to fix this. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. A baby, regardless of whose it was, changed everything. Even if we proved the con, even if Ethan agreed to divorce Margot, there would be a child tying them together forever. Unless the child was Devon's. Unless we could prove that Margot had been unfaithful throughout the entire relationship. I had 48 hours to prepare for either outcome. 48 hours before I either received Margot's confession or delivered the evidence myself. The question was, would Ethan believe me? Or would he choose to believe the woman he'd married, the woman who might be carrying his child? 48 hours came and went with complete silence from both Devon and Margot. No confession, no phone call, no tearful admission. Just a text from Ethan on the evening of the second day, asking if I wanted to join them for brunch on Sunday. Margot has some exciting news to share, he wrote, followed by a series of celebratory emojis. I knew exactly what that news was. She was going to announce the pregnancy without disclosing the uncertainty about paternity. She was doubling down on the con, using the baby as insurance to secure her position in Ethan's life. I couldn't let that happen. I called Chloe immediately. She's going to tell him about the pregnancy without telling him the truth. If she does that, if Ethan bonds with the idea of being a father before knowing there's a chance the baby isn't his, it'll be exponentially harder to get through to him. Then you need to act first, Chloe said. Tonight, before that brunch happens. He won't believe me. He's too happy, too invested in this fantasy of his perfect life with Margot. Then make sure he has no choice but to believe you. Show him everything at once. The photos, the financial records, the text messages, Devon's confession. Don't give him room to rationalize. My hands were shaking. What if this destroys him? What if letting this continue destroys him worse? Chloe's voice was gentle but firm. Vivienne, I've been a therapist for 23 years. I've seen what happens when people live in false realities built by manipulative partners. It doesn't end well, ever. The longer it goes on, the worse the damage. I knew she was right. I'd been delaying out of fear, out of a desperate hope that somehow this could be resolved without completely shattering my son's world. But that hope was a delusion. There was no soft landing here. There was only the choice between short-term devastation and long-term destruction. I need to do this in person, I said, not at their apartment where Margot can intervene. Somewhere neutral. Bring him to your house. Tell him you need to discuss something important about the family finances or the trust. Something that requires privacy but doesn't sound alarming. I texted Ethan within minutes. Can you come by the house tomorrow morning around 10? I need to discuss some updates to your trust fund. Just you, please. Financial matters. He responded almost immediately. Sure, Mom. Everything okay? Everything's fine. Just routine matters that need your signature. I barely slept that night. I kept rehearsing what I would say, how I would present the evidence, what I would do when he inevitably defended Margot, when he tried to explain away the unexplainable. I imagined every possible reaction, from anger to denial to complete breakdown. But I couldn't imagine the one thing I desperately wanted, that he would simply believe me immediately and walk away from Margot without a fight. Ethan arrived at 9:57 the next morning, punctual as always. He was wearing weekend casual clothes, his hair slightly disheveled, smiling that open, trusting smile that made him look younger than 28. Looking at him, I saw the boy who used to run to me with every skinned knee and broken toy, believing absolutely that Mom could fix anything. Hey, Mom, he said, kissing my cheek. You sounded kind of serious in your text. Is there a problem with the trust? Sit down, sweetheart. We need to talk. Something in my voice made his smile fade. He sat on the couch, his body language shifting from relaxed to concerned. What's going on? I sat across from him, the tablet with all the evidence on the coffee table between us. Before I show you what I need to show you, I want you to know that everything I'm about to tell you comes from a place of love. I'm your mother, and protecting you is the most important thing I'll ever do. You're scaring me. I know, and I'm sorry, but you need to see something. I turned the tablet toward him and opened the first photo. Margot and Devon in the garden at the wedding, caught in their kiss, the timestamp clearly visible. Ethan stared at the screen. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he reached for the tablet with trembling hands. What is this? Thomas Brennan, the wedding photographer, found these while preparing your album. He called me 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks? Ethan's voice cracked. You've known about this for 2 weeks and didn't tell me? Because I needed to understand what I was looking at before I destroyed your marriage. I needed to know if this was a one-time mistake or something more. I swiped to the next photo and the next, showing him the progression. These were taken at 9:47 p.m., the exact moment you were giving your speech. No. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. No. There has to be an explanation. Devon would never, Margot would never. There's more. I opened the folder containing the text messages between Devon and Margot from before they supposedly met. They've known each other for 2 years. Devon visited Margot's apartment 6 times the summer before she met you. This meeting at the gallery, it wasn't chance, Ethan. It was planned. I watched my son's face as he read the messages, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his hands start to shake so badly he almost dropped the tablet. Read this one specifically, I said softly, pointing to the message where they discussed splitting $9 million. Ethan read it, then read it again and again. This can't be real. This has to be faked or taken out of context or... I hired a private investigator. Everything has been verified. The timestamps, the metadata, the financial records. I have 47 pages of documentation. I paused, knowing the next part would hurt the most. And 2 days ago, I confronted Devon. I have a recording of him admitting everything. A recording. Ethan's voice was hollow. You've been investigating my wife and my best friend like they're criminals. They are criminals, Ethan. This is fraud. They targeted you deliberately because you were vulnerable and wealthy. Stop. He stood abruptly, the tablet falling onto the couch. I can't. I need to talk to Margot. She'll explain. There has to be an explanation. There's one more thing you need to know before you do that. I forced myself to stay calm, even though my heart was breaking for him. Margot is pregnant. Ethan's face transformed. She told you? When did she? She didn't tell me. Devon did. And there's a problem, sweetheart. She's 7 weeks along. She and Devon were together the week before your wedding. They don't know if the baby is yours or his. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of my living room, his face cycling through expressions too fast to track. Shock, denial, pain, rage, devastation. "No," he finally said. "No, you're lying. You never liked Margot. You've been trying to sabotage us from the beginning. Ethan, please." "No." His voice was loud now, angry. "My father just died and you discovered he'd been lying to you for decades, so now you think everyone is lying about everything. But I'm not Dad, and Margot is not whatever woman he was involved with. This is my life, and you don't get to destroy it because you're paranoid. I have evidence. I don't care about your evidence. I care about my wife, who I love, who loves me, who's carrying my child. Our child. And I'm not going to let you poison that with your conspiracy theories and your private investigators." He was heading toward the door. I stood, desperate. "Ethan, wait. Just listen." "I'm done listening. I'm going home to my wife, and I don't want to hear from you until you're ready to apologize for this, for all of it. Please, just demand a paternity test. Just ask Margot directly about Devon. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize for everything. But if I'm right, you're not right. And I'm done." The door slammed behind him with a finality that echoed through the house. I stood there, alone, surrounded by evidence that proved everything I'd said was true, and realized that truth didn't matter if the person you were trying to save refused to see it. Chloe was right. He wasn't ready to believe. The fantasy was too important, the alternative too devastating. But there was one person who could force him to face reality. Margot herself. And I was going to make sure she had no choice but to tell him the truth. Ethan didn't speak to me for 3 days. No calls, no texts, complete silence. I knew he'd gone straight to Margot, probably told her everything I'd said, and she'd spun whatever story she needed to keep him under her spell. The thought of them together, her feeding him lies while he chose to believe her over his own mother, made me feel physically ill. But I couldn't force the truth on someone who wasn't ready to hear it. I'd learned that lesson painfully with Richard. Even after his death, even with bank statements and emails in front of me, part of me had wanted to find alternative explanations, to preserve the illusion of the marriage I thought I'd had. So I waited, and I planned. On the 4th day, I received a text from an unknown number. "This is Margot. We need to talk, just the two of us. Can you meet me at the Starbucks on Greenwich Avenue in an hour?" I stared at the message, my heart pounding. This was either a trap or a confession, and I had no way of knowing which until I was sitting across from her. I called Marcus immediately. "Margot wants to meet. I need you to have someone nearby, recording if possible." "I'll be there myself," he said. "I'll sit in a corner with a laptop. If anyone asks, I'm just working remotely." An hour later, I walked into the Starbucks to find Margot already seated at a corner table, 2 untouched lattes in front of her. She looked different than I'd ever seen her. No makeup, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater. She looked young and exhausted, and for the first time since I'd met her, genuine. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly as I sat down. "I'm here. Talk." She wrapped her hands around her latte cup, staring into it like it contained answers. "Ethan told me everything you said, showed me the photos, the text messages. He was devastated, Vivienne. Completely destroyed. And let me guess, you convinced him it was all a misunderstanding." "No." Her voice was barely audible. "I told him the truth. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me." "You what?" "I told him everything. About Devon, about the plan, about how we met before the gallery. All of it." She finally looked up at me, and her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. I couldn't keep lying. Not after seeing what it was doing to him, tearing him apart between believing you or believing me. He deserved the truth. Why now? Why not 3 days ago when he came to you? Because 3 days ago, I was still trying to save myself. I told him you were wrong, that you'd misunderstood things, that the photos were from a moment when Devon was comforting me because I was overwhelmed by the wedding. Ethan wanted so badly to believe me. He needed to believe me. She wiped at her eyes with shaking hands. But then Devon called. He was drunk, crying, saying he couldn't live with what we'd done anymore. Ethan heard parts of the conversation. Heard Devon say he was sorry, that he never meant for it to go this far. And Ethan just looked at me with this expression like I'd killed something inside him. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant. But sitting across from this broken young woman, I mostly felt tired. Where is he now? I don't know. He left last night around 11. Just walked out without saying where he was going. He's not answering my calls or texts. I'm terrified he's going to do something stupid. Fear shot through me. What do you mean, something stupid? He was talking about how everyone he loves lies to him. His father had secrets, now me, now Devon. He said he couldn't trust anyone, couldn't trust his own judgment about people. Vivienne, he wasn't thinking clearly. He scared me. I was already pulling out my phone, calling Ethan's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I called his office. They said he'd called in sick. I tried his 3 closest friends after Devon. None of them had heard from him. Tell me exactly what he said before he left. Margot's voice was shaking. He said that his whole life was built on lies, that he couldn't tell what was real anymore. He asked about the baby, asked if I knew who the father was. I told him I didn't know, that I'd been with Devon the week before the wedding. He laughed, this horrible, broken laugh. Then he said that even his own child might not be his, and what was the point of any of it? Did he threaten to hurt himself? Not explicitly, but the way he was talking, the look in his eyes, it was like he'd just given up on everything. I've never seen him like that. I stood up, my mind racing through possibilities. I'm calling the police to do a wellness check at the apartment. You're going to tell me every place he might go, every friend, every location that means something to him. For the next 2 hours, Margot and I became unlikely allies, united by terror for Ethan's safety. We called everyone, checked everywhere. His gym said he hadn't been in. The architectural firm he'd been working with on a project hadn't seen him. His college roommate in Boston hadn't heard from him in weeks. Finally, Chloe called me back. I'd reached out to her an hour earlier, desperate. Vivienne, I think I know where he might be. Do you remember the cabin in the Berkshires? The one Richard used to take him to for father-son weekends? The cabin. God, I hadn't thought about that place in years. Richard had bought it when Ethan was 10, a small property near a lake where they'd go fishing and hiking. After Richard died, Ethan had gone there a few times alone, trying to feel close to his father. I'm going there now, I said. I'm coming with you, Margot said immediately. Absolutely not. He's my husband. I'm coming. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she'd lost any right to be involved in Ethan's life. But the truth was, I didn't have time for that fight. Every minute we wasted was another minute Ethan was alone with his darkest thoughts. The drive to the Berkshires took nearly 2 hours. Margot and I barely spoke, the silence in the car heavy with unspoken accusations and shared fear. Marcus followed us in his own vehicle, insisting that whatever happened next, we needed a witness and someone thinking clearly. When we pulled up to the cabin, Ethan's car was in the driveway. Relief and terror hit me simultaneously. He was here, but what state would we find him in? The cabin was dark, except for a single light in the main room. I approached the door, Margot behind me. It was unlocked. That scared me more than anything else. The Ethan I knew would never leave a door unlocked. Ethan, I called out, pushing the door open. Sweetheart, it's Mom. I'm here. He was sitting on the couch in the dark living room, a half-empty bottle of Richard's old scotch on the coffee table in front of him. He looked up when we entered, and the expression on his face broke my heart. He looked like a lost child. Of course you two came together, he said, his voice slurred slightly. The 2 women in my life who've been lying to me. Makes sense you'd team up. Ethan, I never lied to you, I said gently, moving closer. Everything I told you was the truth. You knew for 2 weeks. 2 weeks you watched me be happy, knowing it was all fake, and you said nothing. He took another drink from the bottle. That's lying by omission, Mom. I was trying to protect you. I was trying to gather enough evidence that you couldn't deny what was happening. Protect me. He laughed that horrible, broken laugh Margot had described. You want to protect me? You can't. Nobody can. Because apparently, I'm the idiot who can't tell when people are using him, when his own wife was sent to con him by his best friend. Margot moved forward then, tears streaming down her face. Ethan, please, let me explain. Explain what? He stood up abruptly, swaying slightly. Explain how you and Devon plotted to steal my inheritance. Explain how every moment of our relationship was calculated. Explain how our maybe baby might actually be his. It wasn't all fake, Margot said desperately. Yes, Devon introduced us intentionally. Yes, I knew who you were and what you were worth. But Ethan, I fell in love with you. That part was real. Was it? Ethan's voice was venomous. Was it real when you were kissing Devon at our wedding? Was it real when you went to his apartment while I was at work? Which parts were real, Margot? Because from where I'm standing, all of it looks like a performance. The love was real. The falling for you was real. I didn't expect that. I was supposed to play a part, but then I actually started caring about you, about us, and I didn't know how to get out of the lie without destroying everything. So you just kept lying, kept pretending, kept letting me fall deeper while you and my best friend laughed about how gullible I was. We never laughed. Devon is in love with me and God, I don't even know what I feel anymore. But Ethan, I care about you. I do. This baby, whatever happens, I want it to be yours. I want this marriage to be real. It can't be real when it was built on lies. Ethan was shouting now, his composure completely shattered. Don't you understand that? Every moment we had together is tainted. Every time you said you loved me, I'll wonder if you meant it or if you were just keeping the con going. Every kiss, every conversation, every plan we made for our future, all of it is poisoned. I stepped forward, putting myself between them. Ethan, I need you to look at me. You're hurt and you're angry and you have every right to be. But you're also drunk and you drove here in this condition and I need to know that you're going to be okay. I'm not going to be okay, Mom. How am I supposed to be okay? The woman I married was sent to manipulate me. My best friend was the one who orchestrated it. You knew and didn't tell me. Dad had secrets he kept until he died. Who the hell am I supposed to trust? You can trust yourself, I said firmly. Your instincts were right. You felt something was off with Margot from the beginning. You told me that. You sensed something was too perfect, too convenient. But you wanted so badly to believe in love, in happiness, in the possibility of a perfect life, that you ignored those instincts. So this is my fault? No. This is the fault of people who chose to manipulate you. But going forward, you get to choose how you respond. You can let this destroy you, or you can learn from it and become stronger. Ethan sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. I wanted to die, Mom. When I realized it was all fake, I sat in the apartment with Dad's old gun, and I seriously considered it. Just ending it. Not having to feel this anymore. My blood ran cold. Where's the gun now? I threw it in the lake. About an hour before you got here. I went down to the dock where Dad used to take me fishing, and I thought about all the times he told me to trust people, to see the best in them, and I threw the gun as far as I could. I sat beside him, pulling him into my arms like I used to when he was small. He collapsed against me, finally crying, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. Margot stood frozen a few feet away, watching the man she'd helped break fall apart. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, my voice hard. Sorry doesn't undo the damage. I know it doesn't, but I need him to know that I never wanted this. That somewhere along the way, the con became real for me. That I was trapped by my own lies as much as he was. That's convenient, I said. You caught feelings, so that makes the fraud acceptable? No, nothing makes it acceptable. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking him to know that the last 6 months, maybe longer, what I felt was real. The fear of losing him was real. The guilt was eating me alive. Ethan pulled away from me, wiping his face roughly. What about the baby? We'll do a paternity test, Margot said immediately. As soon as it's safe. And whatever the result, I'll handle it. If it's Devon's, I'll disappear. If it's yours, I'll give you full custody. I'll sign whatever papers you want. I just need you to know that I'm not trying to trap you anymore. Anymore, Ethan repeated bitterly. Like that makes it better. Ethan, I said gently, we need to get you home. Real home. To my house. You need sleep and food and probably a therapist. We can figure out the rest later. He nodded slowly, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. What about her? Margot spoke before I could. I'll go to my parents in Ohio. Give you space. I'll have my lawyer contact yours about the separation papers. We've been married 3 weeks, Ethan said, his voice hollow. 3 weeks, and it's already over. It was over before it began, I said quietly. You just didn't know it yet. Marcus helped me get Ethan to my car. He was compliant, almost docile, the fight completely drained out of him. Margot drove away in her own car, heading in the opposite direction. I watched her taillights disappear and felt nothing but contempt for the woman who'd systematically dismantled my son's ability to trust. On the drive back to Greenwich, Ethan fell asleep in the passenger seat, his face pressed against the window. He looked younger in sleep, vulnerable, and I was struck by how much he still looked like the little boy who used to believe I could fix anything. But I couldn't fix this. I could only help him survive it. When we got to my house, I settled him into his old bedroom. He woke up briefly when I tucked the blanket around him, and he grabbed my hand. I should have listened to you, he whispered. You knew something was wrong from the beginning. You wanted to believe in love. That's not a character flaw, sweetheart. That's being human. I don't know how to come back from this. One day at a time. And I'll be here for every single one of them. He fell back asleep, and I sat in the chair beside his bed, like I used to when he was sick as a child. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over Long Island Sound, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. My son's marriage was over. His trust in people was shattered. His best friendship was destroyed. But he was alive. He was here. And that was enough for now. The rest we would figure out together. Ethan stayed with me for 3 weeks after that night at the cabin. The first week, he barely left his old bedroom except to eat the meals I brought him. He slept 15, 16 hours a day, his body and mind shutting down to process the trauma. I didn't push him. I just made sure he ate, made sure he showered, made sure he knew I was there. Chloe came by daily, sitting with him for therapy sessions that sometimes lasted hours. She helped him understand that what had happened wasn't a reflection of his worth or his judgment, but rather a sophisticated manipulation by people who'd studied his vulnerabilities and exploited them deliberately. Trauma bonding is real, she explained to both of us one afternoon. Margot came into Ethan's life at his lowest point, when he was grieving Richard and desperate for connection. That's not coincidence. That's predatory targeting. And the shame Ethan feels about falling for it is exactly what manipulators count on to keep their victims silent. By the second week, Ethan started emerging from his room more regularly. He'd sit on the terrace with me in the mornings, drinking coffee in silence while watching the sailboats on the Sound. He didn't want to talk about Margot or Devon or the baby. He just wanted to exist without having to perform or explain or justify. I gave him that space. But I also made sure the legal and practical matters were being handled. Marcus delivered the preliminary paternity test results on day 17. Margot had agreed to an early genetic screening that could determine paternity without risk to the pregnancy. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 6 hours before Ethan finally opened it. The baby was Devon's. I watched my son read those results, watched his face cycle through emotions I couldn't fully interpret. Relief, certainly. But also grief, I thought, for the child that might have been his under different circumstances. I wanted to be a father, he said quietly. Even knowing everything, part of me still hoped it would be mine. How messed up is that? It's not messed up. It's human. You're allowed to grieve what might have been, even when you know it shouldn't have been. The annulment papers were filed the next day, citing fraud and misrepresentation. Margot didn't contest anything. She signed every document her lawyer put in front of her, gave up any claim to Ethan's assets, and disappeared back to Ohio within a week. Devon was another matter entirely. Ethan refused to speak to him, refused to even acknowledge the dozens of messages and calls Devon left. Finally, I called Devon myself. He doesn't want to hear from you, I told him bluntly. Not now, probably not ever. The best thing you can do is leave him alone and figure out how to be a father to the child you helped create. I never meant for it to go this far, Devon said, his voice thick with emotion. I loved Ethan like a brother. I got in over my head with Margot, and I made horrible decisions. You made calculated decisions over a period of years. Don't rewrite history now that you're facing consequences. What can I do to make this right? Nothing. There is no making this right. You destroyed a 10-year friendship and traumatized someone who trusted you completely. The only thing you can do now is leave him alone and let him heal. I hung up before he could respond. The third week brought small signs of life returning to Ethan. He started going for morning runs again. He called his office and arranged to work from home on a few small projects. He even laughed at something stupid on TV one evening, and the sound of it made my heart lift. "I've been thinking," he said one morning over breakfast, "about Dad, about what you found after he died." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "What about it?" "You never told me. About the accounts, the emails, all of it. You let me keep my illusions about him. I wanted to protect your memory of your father. But maybe if you'd told me, if I'd known that people can hide who they really are, even from the people closest to them, maybe I would have been more careful, more skeptical of Margot. Or maybe you would have become cynical and closed off and unable to trust anyone. I made the choice I thought was right at the time, Ethan. Maybe it was wrong. Parenting doesn't come with a manual." He nodded slowly. "I'm not angry about it. I understand now why you were so suspicious of Margot from the beginning. You'd already lived through a version of what happened to me. In some ways, though your father's deceptions were different, he didn't marry me for money. He kept parts of himself hidden, compartmentalized his life in ways I didn't discover until it was too late to ask him why. Do you think people can ever really know each other? Fully, completely, without secrets? I don't know. I think we can try. I think honesty and transparency can be choices we make, commitments we keep. But I also think humans are complex, and sometimes we hide parts of ourselves even from ourselves." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I want to sell the apartment, the one you gave us as a wedding gift. I can't live there, can't even walk past it without feeling sick. Of course, I'll call the real estate agent today. And I want to donate half of whatever we get from the sale to an organization that helps victims of financial fraud, people like me who got conned by people they trusted. I think that's a beautiful idea." The apartment sold within 2 weeks for $645,000. Ethan donated $322,000 to a nonprofit that provided legal assistance to fraud victims. The remainder went into an account he barely touched. "Money doesn't feel real anymore," he told me. "It's just numbers that made me a target." "Money is a tool," I said. "It gave you opportunities, but it also made you vulnerable. The key is learning how to protect yourself without closing yourself off completely." By week 5, Ethan moved back to his own place, a modest apartment in Stamford that he'd rented himself, paying market rate, not using any of his inheritance. "I need to know I can make it on my own," he explained, "that I'm not just the sum of my trust fund." I understood that. He was rebuilding his sense of self, figuring out who he was outside of his relationships and his wealth. Thomas Brennan, the photographer who'd started this entire revelation, became an unexpected friend. He and Ethan met for coffee occasionally, two men who'd discovered betrayals through camera lenses, finding common ground in their experiences. Thomas introduced Ethan to his therapist, a specialist in trauma from intimate partner manipulation. Marcus Webb closed his investigation file, but stayed in touch, checking in every few weeks to see how Ethan was managing. "He's one of the resilient ones," Marcus told me after a particularly good conversation with my son. "He's processing instead of avoiding. That takes real strength." 6 months after that terrible night at the cabin, Ethan came over for Sunday dinner, something that had become a weekly tradition. He looked healthier, his face less haunted, his eyes clearer. "I've been dating someone," he said casually over dessert. My heart seized. "Oh, her name is Rebecca. She's a teacher, 5th grade. We met at a bookstore, argued about whether the mystery section should be alphabetized by author or title." He smiled, and it reached his eyes. "She has no idea who my family is or what I'm worth. I told her I'm an architect who lives in a small apartment and drives a 10-year-old Honda, which is all true. And how does it feel? Terrifying, but also good. I'm taking it slow, being honest about my past, about what happened. She knows I was married briefly, that it ended badly. She knows I'm in therapy, and she's patient with me when I have moments of paranoia or doubt. I'm proud of you," I said, meaning it completely. "I'm proud of me, too, for not letting what Margot and Devon did turn me into someone bitter and closed off, for choosing to heal instead of hide. We sat on the terrace after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sound in shades of orange and purple. Ethan was quiet, contemplative. "I forgive you, you know," he said finally, "for not telling me about Dad's secrets, for waiting 2 weeks to show me the wedding photos. I understand why you made those choices. Thank you," I said, tears pricking my eyes. "And I forgive Margot too, not for what she did, but because holding on to that anger was poisoning me. She was desperate and made terrible choices. That doesn't excuse anything, but it makes her human rather than monstrous. That's very mature of you. Devon, though," Ethan's voice hardened slightly. "That one's going to take longer, maybe forever. What he did felt more personal somehow. He knew me, really knew me, and he still chose to use that knowledge to hurt me. You don't have to forgive everyone, sweetheart. Some betrayals are beyond forgiveness. Maybe, or maybe someday I'll get there, but not today." I heard through mutual acquaintances that Devon and Margot had a daughter, that they'd gotten married in a courthouse ceremony in Toledo, that they were struggling financially and emotionally. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt sad for the child being raised by 2 people drowning in guilt and regret. Ethan never asked about them, and I never volunteered information. A year after the wedding that never should have happened, Ethan brought Rebecca to Sunday dinner. She was lovely, warm and genuine, with an infectious laugh and absolutely no artifice. She taught elementary school in Bridgeport, drove a Subaru covered in bumper stickers about literacy, and had no idea that the quiet, kind architect she was dating came from money. "When are you going to tell her?" I asked Ethan privately while Rebecca was in the bathroom. "Soon, when I'm sure she loves me for me, not for what I represent." "But honestly, Mom, I think she might actually be annoyed that I didn't tell her sooner. She's practical that way." He was right. When he finally told Rebecca the truth about his financial situation 3 months later, her response was to ask why he was living in a cramped apartment and driving a car that barely passed inspection when he could afford better. "Because I needed to know who I was without the money," he explained. "And now you know," she said simply. "So stop punishing yourself and get a car with working air conditioning." They got engaged 2 years after they met, married in a small ceremony at my house with 30 guests, no photographer beyond a friend with an iPhone, and vows they wrote themselves about honesty and transparency and choosing each other every day. I watched my son marry for the 2nd time, but this time I had no doubts, no whispered warnings from my intuition. This time, I saw 2 people who genuinely knew each other, flaws and all, and chose each other anyway. Standing on my terrace after the ceremony, watching Ethan dance with his wife while the sun set over the Sound, I thought about everything we'd survived, the betrayal, the grief, the dark night at the cabin when I thought I might lose him. But we'd survived. More than that, we'd both learned to trust ourselves again, to listen to our instincts, to demand honesty and transparency from the people in our lives. And most importantly, we'd learned that being conned, being betrayed, being deceived by people we trusted didn't make us weak or stupid. It made us human. And choosing to heal, to trust again, to love again despite the risks, that's what made us strong. Ethan caught my eye across the terrace and smiled, that open, genuine smile I thought I'd lost forever, that terrible night at the cabin. I smiled back, raising my glass in a silent toast, to survival, to healing, to the strength it takes to trust again, and to mothers who will always, always protect their children, no matter what it costs.